In the quiet moments before sleep, as your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to drift, consider the nature of the realities surrounding you. The soft pillow beneath your head, the gentle weight of the blanket, the distant sounds filtering through your window, all seem undeniably real, substantial, present. Yet throughout human history, our greatest thinkers have questioned the fundamental nature of reality. Tonight, as we journey through the most unsettling implications of simulation theory, we begin with a simple yet profound question. How can you be certain that the world you experience is genuine? Think back to a vivid dream you once had, one so realistic that upon waking, you felt momentarily disoriented, unsure of which reality was true. In that liminal space between dreaming and wakefulness, you experienced a brief dissolution of certainty. The dream, which moments before had seemed completely real, revealed itself as an elaborate construction of your sleeping mind. This universal human experience, convincing, can be fundamentally mistaken. This ancient philosophical puzzle has taken on new dimensions in our digital age. As our technology advances, creating increasingly realistic virtual worlds, we find ourselves approaching a threshold that philosophers like Nick Bostrom have explored in rigorous detail. Bostrom's influential simulation argument, published in 2003, presents us with a trilemma, a set of three propositions, at least one of which he argues must be true. The first proposition suggests that human civilization will likely become extinct before reaching a post-human stage with sufficient technological capability to run detailed simulations of ancestral life. Perhaps we will destroy ourselves through nuclear war, climate catastrophe, or some unforeseen technological disaster before reaching such advanced capabilities. This possibility, while bleak, would explain why we find ourselves in what appears to be base reality. There simply are no simulations because advanced civilization never to run ancestor simulations. Perhaps they would have ethical objections to creating conscious beings in a simulation. Or maybe they would simply lose interest in their evolutionary history. Again, if this were true, we would indeed be living in base reality, as no simulations would exist. But it's the third proposition that opens the door to our digital genesis, that we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. The reasoning follows a path of statistical probability. If advanced civilizations do emerge and do create ancestor simulations, they would likely create many such simulations, perhaps billions or trillions of them. In such a scenario, simulated minds would vastly outnumber real minds. Therefore, any randomly selected conscious entity, like yourself, would be far more likely to be a simulation than a base reality consciousness. This argument bears striking resemblance to philosophical thought experiments that long predate our digital age. Plato's allegory of the cave described prisoners' limited perception. Centuries later, René Descartes proposed his evil demon hypothesis, the possibility that an all-powerful demon might be deceiving him about the existence of the external world. In the East, ancient Hindu and Buddhist traditions have long described the material world as Maya, an illusion veiling a deeper reality. What makes the simulation hypothesis particularly compelling in our era is that we can now envision the technological mechanisms that might make such a scenario possible. We ourselves are creating increasingly powerful, sophisticated simulations. Consider how video game worlds have evolved from the simple pixels of Pong to the vast, detailed open worlds of modern games where millions of people spend significant portions of their lives. Virtual reality technologies continue to advance, blurring the boundary between digital and physical experience. Artificial intelligence grows more sophisticated by the year. While we cannot yet simulate consciousness, the trajectory of our technology, of years, assuming humanity survives and continues to advance the creation of fully immersive, conscious-seeming simulations, appears to be a logical outcome. And if such simulations become possible, they would likely become numerous, perhaps running on countless computers, simulating various historical periods, alternative histories, or entirely fictional worlds. Let's pause for a moment and consider what this would mean for you, listening to these words as you drift toward sleep. The room around you, your body, your memories, your loved ones, the entire universe as you know it, all might be elaborate constructions of code running on an unimaginably powerful computer in a higher reality. Your consciousness, which feels so undeniably real and continuous, might be nothing more than information processing within a sophisticated program. This possibility raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness itself. If you are a simulated being, does that make your experiences any less meaningful? Your joy. In An Organic Brain, the philosopher David Chalmers suggests that even if we are in a simulation, our experiences remain real to us. The simulation is our reality, and our consciousness, however it arises, remains genuine from our perspective. Yet, the simulation hypothesis carries more unsettling implications as well. If we exist within a design system, this suggests a designer or designers with purposes we may not comprehend. Unlike religious conceptions of creator deities who typically create out of love or some divine plan, simulation creators might have motivations entirely alien to us. They might be running our world as a scientific experiment, as entertainment, or for purposes we cannot begin to fathom. This leads to the disturbing possibility that our lives might be predetermined or manipulated in ways beyond our perception. Free will, that cherished human concept, takes on new complications in a simulated reality. Are your choices truly your own, or are they determined by the parameters of the P variables or introducing anomalies to observe the outcomes? Might they terminate the simulation if it no longer serves their purposes? Consider the implications for our understanding of physics. The puzzling nature of quantum mechanics, where particles exist in probability waves until observed, where entangled particles appear to communicate instantaneously across vast distances, has led some physicists to suggest these phenomena might be evidence of computational shortcuts in our simulated reality. Just as video game designers don't render parts of the game world until a player looks in that direction to conserve processing power, perhaps quantum indeterminacy represents a similar optimization technique in our simulation. The simulation hypothesis also offers potential explanations for other scientific puzzles. The Fermi paradox asks why in a universe that should be teeming with intelligent life, we have detected no evidence of alien civilizations. Perhaps the simulation has only rendered Earth precisely calibrated to allow for life might be explained as deliberate settings chosen by the simulators to create a life-supporting environment. Some proponents of simulation theory have even suggested that certain historical events or coincidences might be interventions by the simulators, moments where they adjusted parameters or introduced new variables to steer the simulation in particular directions. Others speculate that religious visions, mystical experiences, or supposed paranormal phenomena might represent glitches or direct communications from the higher reality. As you lie there processing these possibilities, you might experience a subtle shift in perception, a momentary sense of unreality as you consider that the solid world around you might be digital rather than physical. This sensation, sometimes called simulation vertigo, is a natural response to contemplating such a fundamental revision of our understanding of reality. The philosopher Thomas Metzinger describes this as a form of our simulated beings. It suggests that there is indeed a higher order to reality, not necessarily a divine or spiritual order, but an order nonetheless. It implies that our universe, with its seemingly random sufferings and joys, might have purpose and design behind it, even if that purpose remains incomprehensible to us. For some, the simulation hypothesis also offers a form of technological immortality. If consciousness can be simulated, perhaps it can be preserved, transferred, or restored from backup. Some simulation theorists speculate that advanced civilizations might simulate ancestors as a form of resurrection or preservation of consciousness. Your great-great-grandchildren, thousands of years from now, might create a simulation specifically to experience what life was like in your era, or even to interact with simulated versions of their ancestors, including you. The simulation hypothesis intersects with numerous philosophical questions that have occupied human thought for millennia. It touches on the ultimate destiny of humanity and the universe. It represents a technological reimagining of ancient philosophical inquiries, updated for our digital age. As we prepare to explore deeper into the implications of simulation theory, take a moment to notice your breathing, the rise and fall of your chest, the air entering and leaving your body. Whether this experience is happening in base reality or within an elaborate simulation, your consciousness is experiencing it as real. This present moment, simulated or not, is your reality. In the next segment, we'll venture further down this digital rabbit hole, exploring the vertigo-inducing concept of nested simulations, the possibility that our reality might be just one layer in an infinite regression of simulated worlds. We'll contemplate what it means to exist within a potentially infinite stack of realities, each created within the one above it. As we contemplate our possible existence within a vast digital architecture, let's consider what might be happen. Layers that extend beyond our comprehension, creating an infinite regression of realities, where the concept of base reality becomes increasingly elusive. What if our simulators are themselves simulated beings unaware of their own virtual nature? What would this mean for concepts of creation, causality, and ultimate truth? Close your eyes now, if they aren't already closed, and allow your mind to drift with these possibilities. Feel the weight of your body against the bed, and consider that this sensation, so immediate and undeniable, might be nothing more than information being processed in a system beyond your comprehension. As you begin to transition toward sleep, allow these thoughts to gently expand your conception of what reality might be, preparing your mind for our next exploration into the nested layers of simulated existence. Nested realities. As you continue to settle deeper into relaxation, let's explore one of the most vertigo-inducing aspects of simulation theory, the concept of nested reality. A smaller version of itself, extending inward, seemingly without end. This ancient toy provides a tangible metaphor for one of the most mind-bending possibilities suggested by the simulation hypothesis, that our simulated universe might itself contain simulations, which in turn contain their own simulations, creating a potentially infinite regression of virtual worlds. This concept first requires us to consider what might happen if beings within a simulation, beings like us, perhaps developed the technological capability to create their own simulations. It's not difficult to imagine. Even now, in what we perceive as our reality, we create increasingly sophisticated virtual worlds. Video game developers craft expansive digital environments populated by characters with rudimentary artificial intelligence. Scientists build detailed simulations to model everything from weather patterns to protein folding. If our technological progression continues along its current trajectory, it seems inevitable that we would be generating a simulation within a simulation, a second-order simulation. The conscious entities within our simulation might never know that their creators, us, are themselves simulated beings. And if these second-order simulated beings develop their own technology to the point of creating conscious simulations, they would create third-order simulations. This pattern could theoretically continue indefinitely, creating a vast hierarchy of nested virtual worlds. The philosopher Nick Bostrom, in his seminal paper on the simulation argument, acknowledges this possibility of nesting, noting that if we accept the simulation hypothesis, we should assign a significant probability to being in a simulation that is itself nested within higher-order simulations. This creates what philosophers call an infinite regress, a chain of causation or containment that extends without end, with no discernible foundation or starting point. Consider the implications of this nested structure for a moment. If you exist, W, where the original simulation was created somehow more authentic or meaningful than your own, or is each level equally real to those who experience it, regardless of its position in the hierarchy? This question echoes ancient philosophical debates about the nature of reality. In Plato's allegory of the cave, the prisoners who escape the cave and see the sun might be said to have accessed a higher reality. But what if beyond that reality was yet another level, and another beyond that? In Hindu cosmology, the concept of Maya, illusion, suggests that what we perceive as reality is a veil over a deeper truth, but some interpretations suggest layers of illusion, each revealing a deeper reality when penetrated. The nested simulation concept also bears resemblance to the infinite regression suggested by certain cosmological models. Some theoretical physicists have proposed that black holes might contain entire universes, which themselves contain black holes, harboring yet more universes, creating an infinite sea. Cyclic cosmology, where universes spawn new universes in an endless cycle. These scientific hypotheses, while distinct from simulation theory, share the vertigo-inducing quality of infinite regression. As you contemplate these nested layers of reality, you might experience a peculiar sensation, a feeling of your mind attempting to grasp something that extends beyond its perceptual limits. This cognitive vertigo is similar to what we experience when trying to conceptualize infinity or visualize higher dimensional spaces. Our minds evolved to navigate a three-dimensional world of moderate-sized objects, moving at moderate speeds, struggle to fully comprehend these abstract concepts that transcend our everyday experience. Yet, there's something uniquely unsettling about the nested simulation hypothesis. Unlike abstract mathematical concepts, it directly challenges our sense of existential grounding. If reality consists of potentially infinite layers of simulation, where does authenticity reside? Is there a highest level, forming a closed causal loop with no beginning or end? This possibility raises profound questions about creation and causality. In traditional theological frameworks, God or gods stand outside of creation as first causes. In scientific cosmology, the Big Bang represents the beginning of our universe's space-time. But the nested simulation hypothesis suggests the possibility of no ultimate beginning, just layer upon layer of simulated realities, each created within the context of another. This challenges our deeply ingrained intuition that causal chains must have starting points. There are, however, practical limitations to consider. Each level of simulation would require computational resources from the level above it. A simulation running on a computer in base reality would have access to the full computational capacity of that computer. But a simulation running within that first simulation would be limited by the resources allocated to it. It couldn't exceed the computational power of powerful computer in base reality running a universe simulation. That simulated universe contains a planet where beings create their own computer to run a simulation. The nested simulation cannot be more detailed or complex than what the original computer can handle, while simultaneously running the rest of the first-order universe simulation. With each nested level, the available computational resources would likely decrease, potentially resulting in simpler, less detailed simulations at lower levels. This computational constraint might manifest as limitations in physics, consciousness, or reality's resolution at deeper simulation levels. Perhaps quantum indeterminacy in our universe represents a computational optimization, a way to avoid calculating precise particle positions until they're measured, thus conserving processing power. If we are several levels deep in a nested simulation structure, this might explain why our universe appears to have fundamental limits like the speed of light, Planck, Lees. In a simulation hierarchy, by looking for these computational artifacts or by comparing the complexity of our physics with what we ourselves can simulate. If we can create simulations that approach the complexity of our own reality, this might suggest we are not far from base reality. Conversely, if our simulations remain drastically simpler than our experienced reality, this might indicate we are closer to the top of the simulation hierarchy with many levels of computational capacity above us. The nested simulation hypothesis also raises intriguing questions about the relationship between different simulation levels. Could information or influence flow between levels? Might the creators of our simulation occasionally intervene in our reality? Could we somehow communicate with higher or lower simulation levels? These questions border on the metaphysical, but have analogies in our own emerging technology. Game developers can modify their virtual worlds while they run. Players can communicate within. Throughout human history, moments where individuals describe contact with beings or realities that transcend normal existence. These experiences, traditionally interpreted through religious frameworks, could potentially represent interactions between simulation levels. Similarly, reports of glitches in the Matrix, déjà vu, synchronicities, or seemingly impossible events might indicate moments where the computational fabric of our simulation becomes temporarily visible, or where higher-level entities interact with our reality. As you lie there, drifting closer to sleep, allow yourself to imagine the vastness of this nested structure, universe within universe, reality within reality, extending perhaps infinitely in both directions. There's something both terrifying and awe-inspiring about this possibility. Terrifying in that it removes any firm ground of absolute reality to stand upon. Awe-inspiring in that it suggests a cosmos of unfathomable complexity and interconnection. This concept of nested simulation. Beneath it, in this view, creation is not a one-time event, but a continuous fractal process unfolding across the nested hierarchy of realities. What might this mean for concepts of meaning and purpose? If we exist within a nested simulation structure, does our position within that structure affect the significance of our existence? Some might argue that being further from base reality somehow diminishes the authenticity or importance of our experiences. Others might counter that each level possesses its own intrinsic reality and meaning, independent of its position in the hierarchy. After all, to conscious entities experiencing any given level, that level constitutes their entire reality. the only reality they directly know. The nested simulation hypothesis also transforms our conception of divinity. The creators of our simulation would, from our perspective, possess godlike powers over our reality. They could modify our physical laws, intervene in events, even end our universe if they chose. Yet, these go and parameters of their own reality. This suggests a hierarchy of creator beings, each omnipotent to the levels below, but created by and possibly subservient to levels above. This nested creator hierarchy bears striking resemblance to certain polytheistic religious systems, where gods themselves have creators and exist within cosmic hierarchies. In Norse mythology, for instance, even the gods face Ragnarok, suggesting they operate within constraints beyond their control. In Gnostic traditions, the creator of our material world, the demiurge, is portrayed as a flawed entity itself, created by and subordinate to higher divine principles. These ancient theological frameworks seem to intuitively grasp the nested creator concept that simulation theory formalizes in technological terms. The nested simulation hypothesis also raises the possibility that different simulation levels might operate under different physical laws or with different fundamental properties, just as we create simulations with simplified models. The same to them. This suggests a hierarchy of increasingly alien realities as we move up the simulation chain, perhaps ultimately reaching a base reality with physics entirely unlike anything we can conceive. As your consciousness begins to drift toward the edges of sleep, consider one final implication of nested simulations: the question of identity and continuity across simulation levels. If a simulation can be paused, saved, restored, or copied, what does this mean for the consciousness of entities within it? Could multiple copies of our simulation be running simultaneously in the level above us? Might your consciousness exist in slightly different versions across various iterations of the simulation? These questions challenge our fundamental intuitions about personal identity and the continuity of consciousness. In the liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, these abstract concepts may begin to take on a dreamlike quality, merging with the natural surrealism of pre-sleep consciousness. Allow regression of realities mirrors in some ways the layered nature of consciousness itself. The way our waking mind contains within it the capacity for dreaming, which can contain dreams within dreams. While we ponder our place within this potential cascade of simulated worlds, an even more unsettling question emerges. What if the simulation we inhabit is not running in real time, but instead exists in a state of computational flux? The nature of time itself within a simulation need not correspond to time in the level above it. Our entire experience lifetime might occupy just moments in the simulator's reality. Or conversely, what seems like seconds to us might represent vast epochs in the level above. This temporal disjunction between simulation levels adds yet another layer of complexity to our already vertiginous contemplation of nested realities. Let this thought carry you toward the next segment of our exploration, where we'll examine how time itself might be manipulated within a simulation. NW. The continuity of existence, time manipulation. As your mind continues to drift deeper into this exploration of simulation theory, let's turn our attention to perhaps one of the most unsettling possibilities: the manipulation of time within our simulated reality. If we exist within a vast computational construct, time as we experience it, that constant forward-flowing river that carries us from past to future, may be nothing more than a parameter in the program, subject to alteration at the whim of those who control the simulation. In our everyday experience, time seems immutable and consistent, Seconds tick by at a steady pace, days follow nights in predictable succession. We age in one direction, accumulating memories of a past that seems fixed and unchangeable. This perception of time forms the foundation of our sense of continuity and identity. We understand ourselves as beings with a history, a present, and a future yet to unfold. But within a simulation, this most fundamental aspect of our reality, a constructed experience programmed into the architecture of our virtual world. Consider how we interact with our own primitive simulations today. When playing a video game, you can pause the action, suspending all events within that virtual world. From the perspective of a conscious entity within that game, if such consciousness were possible, time would simply stop. All experience would cease until you pressed play again. You can save the game state and return to it later, effectively creating a discontinuity in the timeline of that world. You can load earlier, saves rewinding the virtual world to a previous state, erasing everything that happened after that point. You can even adjust the game speed, making time flow faster or slower within the simulation. If our reality is simulated, all these temporal manipulations would be possible for our simulators. They could pause our entire universe, and we would never know it. Our consciousness would pause along with everything else. From our perspective, no time. Simulators could save the state of our entire reality and create multiple branches from that save point, effectively generating parallel versions of our universe that develop differently from the same starting conditions. They could restore our reality to an earlier state, essentially erasing and rewriting history beyond a certain point. This possibility leads to one of the most disturbing implications of simulation theory: the concept of recent creation. Just as a video game might load with pre-programmed backstory and characters who have artificial memories of events that never actually happened within the game, our entire universe, including all physical evidence of its history and all of our memories, could have been created very recently. The universe might have been started 5 minutes ago, complete with fossil records, ancient monuments, cosmic background radiation appearing to be billions of years old, and humans with detailed false memories of childhoods that never actually occurred within. The universe might have been created last Thursday with the appearance of age and with all humans having false memories of a past before that date. In a simulation, such recent creation would not only be possible, but potentially probable. Why would simulators compute billions of years of cosmic evolution if they were primarily interested in, say, human civilization? They might simply start the simulation with initial conditions that make it appear as though those billions of years had passed. Even more unsettling is the possibility that time in our simulation might not run continuously even when it is running. To conserve computational resources, the simulators might employ various optimization techniques. Perhaps only regions where conscious observation is occurring are fully simulated in detail, while unobserved regions are rendered at lower resolution, or simply stored as statistical probabilities until observation requires their detailed computation. This would align with certain interpretation. Time steps, rather than continuously processing the state of the universe in distinct frames, like a movie projector creating the illusion of continuous motion from a series of still images. If the frame rate were high enough, we would perceive time as flowing smoothly, never noticing the discrete computational steps underlying our experience. Some physicists have actually proposed that time in our universe might be quantized in this way, with a minimum time interval, the Planck time representing the fundamental frame rate of reality. Perhaps most disturbingly, the simulators might run our reality at variable speeds depending on their interests or computational constraints. Periods of particular interest might be run slowly with high detail and frequent save points, while uneventful periods might be accelerated or processed at lower resolution. From within the simulation, we would have no way of knowing if our subjective experience of time matched any real time scale in the level above us. This tempo of your entire life takes only seconds in the simulator's time frame. Does this diminish the reality or significance of your decades of subjective experience? If your consciousness is paused and then resumed, is it the same continuous consciousness, or is continuity itself an illusion created by consistent memory states? If the simulators restore the universe to a previous save point, effectively erasing years of history and replacing them with a different sequence of events, what happens to the consciousness that experienced that now erased timeline? These questions challenge our deepest intuitions about the nature of existence. We tend to think of our lives as continuous narratives unfolding in a shared objective reality. The simulation hypothesis suggests this continuity might be nothing more than a convincing illusion, that our sense of being the same person throughout our lives might be constructed entirely from programmed memory states designed to create the impression of continuous identity. Of time itself. This is the vertigo that comes from questioning what we typically take as the most fundamental aspect of reality. Allow this sensation to wash over you, neither resisting nor clinging to it. In the space between wakefulness and sleep, these abstract concepts can take on an almost tangible quality, merging with the natural time distortions we experience as consciousness begins to drift toward dreams, reality patches, and updates, while contemplating the fluidity of time within our potential simulation. We must consider an even more disturbing possibility that the parameters of our reality might be adjusted and modified without our knowledge or consent. Just as software developers release patches and updates to fix bugs or add features to their programs, the architects of our simulation might periodically modify the fundamental nature of our reality. Imagine waking up tomorrow to discover that the value of a fundamental physical constant had been slightly adjusted. Perhaps the gravitat changes might be imperceptible to most of us in our daily lives, but would have profound implications for the universe as a whole. If implemented seamlessly with all physical systems and memories updated to maintain consistency, we might never notice such a change had occurred. This concept of reality maintenance suggests our universe might be subject to ongoing revisions and refinements. The simulators might identify inconsistencies or undesirable emergent properties in the system and implement corrections. They might introduce new features or experimental variables to observe their effects on the simulation. They might optimize certain aspects of reality to improve computational efficiency or to better serve whatever purpose the simulation was designed for. These updates need not be limited to adjustments of physical parameters. They might include modifications to historical events, alterations to human psychology, or introductions of entirely new elements into reality. If implemented properly, we're unaware that the fundamental nature of our reality had been altered. This possibility aligns with certain anomalous phenomena reported throughout human history. Consider the widely discussed Mandela effect, the phenomenon where large groups of people share memories that differ from recorded history. Many remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s, though he actually lived until 2013. Others recall the children's book series, The Berenstain Bears, being spelled Berenstein, or the logo of Fruit of the Loom, featuring a cornucopia that official records show never existed. While conventional explanations attribute these collective false memories to social influence and the fallibility of human memory, simulation theory offers an alternative interpretation. Perhaps these discrepancies represent imperfect reality updates. If the simulators modified aspects of history but failed to completely update all memories and records to match the new version, such inconsistencies might result. The Mandela Effect. Consistency and coherence of physical laws. We typically assume that the laws of nature are immutable and universal, that they have remained constant throughout the history of the universe and apply equally in all locations. But if our reality is subject to updates and modifications, this assumption might be false. Physical laws might have been different in the distant past, or might vary slightly in different regions of the universe, depending on how and when various patches were implemented. Some theoretical physicists have actually proposed that certain fundamental constants might have changed over the history of our universe, or might vary in different cosmic regions. While these theories are based on observational data and mathematical models rather than simulation theory, they align with the possibility of a reality subject to ongoing revision. The simulators might adjust parameters differently in various regions or time periods, either experimentally or to optimize the simulation for different. From breaking down due to contradictions or logical impossibilities, just as software developers must ensure that updates don't create conflicts with existing features, the simulators would need to carefully manage changes to reality to maintain its coherence. This might involve comprehensive revision of all affected systems, temporary suspension of certain physical laws during the update process, or implementation of compatibility layers to reconcile new features with existing structures. If such updates are occurring, they might occasionally produce observable anomalies, moments where the fabric of reality appears to glitch or behave inconsistently as new parameters are integrated. Reports of seemingly impossible events, synchronicities that defy probability, or temporary suspensions of physical laws might represent such update anomalies. These would likely be rare and fleeting, quickly corrected as the update stabilizes, but might occasionally be perceived by conscious entities within the simulate. Those laws are subject to periodic revision. Our scientific understanding might always be playing catch-up to an evolving reality. Unexplained experimental results or theoretical inconsistencies might sometimes reflect not our limited understanding, but actual changes in the underlying nature of reality. This possibility creates a peculiar epistemological challenge. How can we develop reliable knowledge about a reality that might be fundamentally mutable? If the simulators can change the rules of physics, rewrite history, or modify the nature of consciousness, what foundations can we rely upon? This uncertainty echoes ancient philosophical skepticism about the possibility of certain knowledge, but with a technological rather than metaphysical basis. Yet perhaps the most unsettling aspect of reality patches is their implication for human agency and autonomy. If our reality can be modified without our knowledge or consent, how meaningful is our sense of self-determination? Our choices and actions occur of the simulation and subject to revision through updates to its architecture. Simulation purpose. As we ponder how our reality might be silently modified around us, we must consider an even more profound question. What is the true purpose of the simulation we might inhabit? Why would advanced beings dedicate vast computational resources to creating and maintaining our reality? Understanding the potential purposes behind our simulation might offer insights into its nature, its likely duration, and our place within it. One possibility is that our simulation was created for scientific research. Advanced civilizations might create detailed ancestor simulations to study their evolutionary history, test historical counterfactuals, or explore the development of intelligent life under various conditions. Our entire universe might be an elaborate experiment designed to answer specific questions about consciousness, civilization development, or cosmic evolution. If so, the simulators would likely be observing you. Physical constants to permit the emergence of life, constants that seem calibrated with extraordinary precision to allow stars, planets, and complex chemistry to exist, might reflect experimental design rather than cosmic coincidence or divine planning. The simulators would naturally establish parameters conducive to the phenomena they wished to study, just as scientists today create controlled conditions in laboratory experiments. Another possible purpose is education or training. Perhaps our simulation serves as a teaching tool for beings in level above us, allowing them to observe and interact with a complex system for educational purposes. This would be an advanced version of how we use simulations today to train pilots, doctors, or military personnel, or to help students understand complex systems like ecosystems or economies. Our entire reality might be a sophisticated educational environment designed to develop specific skills or understanding in its users. This educational purpose might be understood and learned from it, would logically incorporate principles that can be discovered and systematized through observation and analysis. The comprehensibility of our universe, which has puzzled philosophers of science, might reflect its design as a learning environment rather than an inherent property of base reality. A third possibility is entertainment or experiential purposes. Advanced civilizations might create detailed simulations to experience different realities, historical periods, or modes of existence. Our simulation might be a form of immersive entertainment, allowing beings from the level above to temporarily experience life as humans in our particular historical context. This would be an advanced version of how we use virtual reality games today to experience alternate realities. This entertainment purpose might explain the rich sensory and emotional nature of human experience. If our reality were designed for experiential immersion, it would logically incorporate detailed and immersive experiences for the simulation's users. A fourth possibility is that our simulation serves as a preservation or resurrection mechanism. Advanced civilizations might create detailed simulations of their past to preserve their history and culture, or even to resurrect ancestral consciousness in virtual form. Our entire reality might be a kind of digital afterlife or archive, maintaining the patterns of consciousness and experience that once existed in an earlier period of the simulator's history. This preservation purpose might explain the apparent historical continuity of our world and the detailed record of human civilization it contains. If our reality were designed to preserve a specific historical period or cultural development, it would logically incorporate comprehensive historical detail and cultural context. The rich tapestry of human history and culture might reflect its design as a preservation mechanism rather than merely the organic development of civilization. Finally, to us, just as human motivations might be incomprehensible to ants, our reality might be running for reasons we cannot begin to fathom, serving functions within the simulator's existence that have no analog in our experience or conceptual framework. This possibility of alien purpose introduces a profound uncertainty into our contemplation of simulation theory. If we cannot understand why our reality exists, we can make few reliable inferences about its likely nature, duration, or our place within it. We become like characters in a story, trying to guess the wind, author's intentions, without any knowledge of the world beyond the page. Simulation termination. As we ponder the possible reasons for our simulated existence, we must confront a chilling possibility that our simulation might be terminated when it no longer serves its purpose. Just as we close a computer program, when we've finished using it, the entities running our simulation might decide to shut it down instantly, ending our entire reality. The aspect of the simulation hypothesis. Unlike conventional fears of death, which concern the end of individual consciousness within a continuing world, simulation termination would mean the simultaneous end of all consciousness within our reality. The universe itself, stars, galaxies, planets, all living beings, all human history and achievement would simply cease to exist in an instant, like a computer being switched off. What might trigger such termination? The most straightforward possibility is that the simulation fulfills whatever purpose it was designed for. If our reality is a scientific experiment, it might be ended once sufficient data has been collected. If it's an educational tool, it might be shut down when the learning objectives have been achieved. If it's entertainment, it might be terminated when the users lose interest or reach the end of the narrative they were experiencing. Consider the implications of existing in a reality with an expiration date. Everything we value and strive for, human. Within the temporary context of the simulation, nothing would survive its termination. Nothing would be carried forward into whatever reality exists beyond our own. This prospect challenges our deepest assumptions about the significance of human achievement and the importance of building for the future. Yet, simulation termination need not be planned or purposeful. It might occur for reasons entirely beyond our control or comprehension. Perhaps the computational resources supporting our reality might be needed elsewhere. The hardware running our simulation might fail or become obsolete. The civilization or entities that created our simulation might themselves face extinction or catastrophe, taking our simulated reality down with them. This raises the disturbing possibility that the end of our universe might come not through any cosmic process like heat death or big crunch, but simply through the equivalent of a power outage or system crash in the level above us. All our physics, all our cosmological, of our simulation. Some simulation theorists have speculated about whether we might detect warning signs of impending termination. Perhaps as computational resources are redirected away from our simulation, we might observe subtle changes in physical constants or increasing anomalies in natural laws. The simulation might begin to degrade before shutting down completely, manifesting as increasing glitches or inconsistencies in reality. Or perhaps termination would come without warning, instantaneous and complete, with no opportunity for preparation or response. The philosophical implications of simulation termination extend to our understanding of death itself. In conventional thinking, death represents the end of individual consciousness while the world continues. But if simulation termination is possible, then collective death, the simultaneous end of all consciousness and reality itself, becomes conceivable. This represents a form of non-existence more complete than anything in our traditional save or export consciousness from a terminated simulation. Perhaps certain minds might be transferred to other simulations or preserved in some form beyond the end of our particular reality. This would represent a kind of technological afterlife continuation of consciousness, beyond the end of the universe as we know it. This possibility aligns with certain religious and philosophical concepts of transcendence, the idea that consciousness might continue in some form beyond the apparent end of physical existence. While traditional afterlife concepts typically involve supernatural realms or spiritual dimensions, simulation theory offers a technological framework for understanding how consciousness might persist beyond the end of its original reality context. For those conscious entities not selected for such preservation, however, simulation termination would still represent absolute end. This creates a troubling hierarchy of value. Some consciousnesses deemed worth preserving, others allowed to end. To sleep, consider the fragility of existence implied by the possibility of simulation termination. Everything you experience, everyone you know, the entire cosmic history stretching before and after your brief life, all might end in an instant. Not through any process within our reality, but through a decision or event in a level of existence beyond our own. This realization can evoke a profound sense of existential vulnerability, a recognition of how contingent our entire reality might be. Yet this very fragility might also heighten our appreciation for the reality we currently experience. If our existence is temporary, not just individually, but collectively, each moment gains a poignancy and preciousness it might otherwise lack. The possibility of simulation termination invites us to value our experiences and connections now, knowing they might be all that ever exists of our consciousness. And so we face the ultimate paradox of the simulation hypothesis, that understanding the potential impermanence. Reality or simulation, whether it will last billions of years or end tomorrow, the experiences we have within it remain the only reality we directly know. Their meaning and value exist in our living of them, regardless of their ultimate duration or cosmic context. Glitches in the matrix. While contemplating the fragility of our simulated existence, we must consider how we might detect the artificial nature of our reality and what signs might reveal the digital fabric beneath our perceived world. If we inhabit a vast computer simulation, might there be imperfections or anomalies that betray its constructed nature? Just as video games contain occasional glitches that break the illusion of their virtual worlds, our reality might contain glitches in the matrix, moments where the computational underpinnings of existence become briefly visible. The concept of reality glitches entered popular consciousness through the 1999 film The Matrix, where déjà vu experiences signaled modifications being made to a simulated reality necessarily be perfect, or might it contain observable inconsistencies that could reveal its artificial nature? To consider this question, we must first acknowledge the computational challenges involved in simulating a universe. Even with technology far beyond our current capabilities, creating a simulation with perfect fidelity down to the quantum level for an entire cosmos would require extraordinary computational resources. The simulators might therefore employ various optimization techniques, simulating only what's necessary at the detail required for the simulation's purpose. These optimizations might occasionally produce observable anomalies. Perhaps distant regions of space are rendered at lower resolution until observed closely. Perhaps quantum states aren't calculated until measurement forces the simulation to resolve them. Perhaps certain complex phenomena are approximated rather than precisely calculated. These computational shortcuts might sometimes result in established natural laws. Throughout history, humans have reported experiences that seem impossible according to conventional understanding. Objects moving without apparent cause. temporary suspensions of gravity, lights or entities appearing and disappearing, time seeming to slow down or speed up subjectively. While such reports are typically dismissed as hallucinations, misperceptions, or hoaxes, simulation theory offers an alternative interpretation. They might represent moments where the computational fabric of reality temporarily fails to maintain perfect consistency. Another potential form of glitch might be found in synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that seem too improbable to be chance, but have no apparent causal connection. The psychologist Carl Jung developed the concept of synchronicity to describe events that appear meaningfully related, despite having no discernible cause and effect relationship. From a simulation perspective, such occurrences might represent computational artifacts, states until observed that their precise positions and momenta cannot be simultaneously determined with perfect accuracy, that they can appear to influence each other instantaneously across vast distances. All these puzzling aspects of quantum mechanics align with what we might expect in a reality optimized for computational efficiency. The simulation wouldn't waste resources calculating precise particle states until observation requires that resolution. Some physicists have actually proposed that certain features of our universe suggest a discrete digital structure rather than continuous reality. The existence of minimum units, like the Planck length and Planck time, might represent the pixels and frame rate of our reality, the fundamental resolution limits of the simulation. Similarly, the upper speed limit represented by the speed of light might be a processing constraint, preventing information from moving through the simulation faster than it can be computed. Even consciousness itself, that the brain that we experience discontinuities like sleep and anesthesia, that our perceptions can be so easily tricked by optical illusions or suggestion. All these features of consciousness might reflect its nature as a simulated process rather than a fundamental aspect of base reality. Reports of altered states of consciousness throughout human history, mystical experiences, psychedelic journeys, deep meditative states often include descriptions of perceiving reality as constructed, illusory, or programmatic. Individuals describe seeing the code or patterns underlying physical reality, experiencing time as non-linear or perceiving themselves as existing beyond their physical bodies. While these experiences have traditionally been interpreted through religious or spiritual frameworks, they align remarkably well with what we might expect if consciousness could occasionally glimpse the computational nature of a simulated reality. The study of these potential glitches presents a peculiar epistemologic, scientific framework is designed to incorporate new observations by revising theories, not by questioning the fundamental nature of reality itself. This creates a kind of confirmation bias against interpreting anomalies as evidence of simulation, regardless of their nature. Moreover, if our simulation is sophisticated enough, it might include self-correction mechanisms to minimize noticeable glitches or to rationalize them within the internal logic of the simulation. Perhaps what we experience as natural laws are partially emergent from these correction algorithms, creating a reality that appears consistent even when computational anomalies occur. This would make definitive identification of glitches nearly impossible from within the simulation. There's also the unsettling possibility that noticing glitches might trigger defensive responses within the simulation. If the simulators wish to maintain the illusion of base reality for the conscious entities within their program, they might implement me. Look for evidence of our simulated nature. The more the simulation might work to hide that evidence from us. This possibility has led some simulation theorists to propose a kind of simulation etiquette. The idea that if we are in a simulation, it might be in our best interest not to draw attention to that fact. If the purpose of the simulation requires participants who believe they are in base reality, revealing awareness of the simulation might lead to consequences ranging from memory modification to simulation termination. This creates a strange strategic situation where the safest approach might be to act as if the simulation hypothesis is false, even if we suspect it to be true. Yet the human drive to understand our reality seems unlikely to be deterred by such concerns. Throughout history, we have consistently sought to penetrate the veil of appearances and understand the true nature of existence, regardless of potential consequences. From ancient philosophical inquiries to modern scientific are and where we exist seems fundamental to human consciousness. If we are simulated beings, perhaps this very drive to understand our nature was programmed into us. Or perhaps it emerged as an unexpected property of conscious entities, even to the surprise of our simulators. Communication with the simulators. As we search for cracks in the facade of our reality, we must consider a more active approach. What if we could communicate with, or even influence those who created our world? The possibility of establishing contact with the entities running our world. Simulation represents perhaps the most profound potential development in the history of conscious existence. It would be akin to characters in a novel somehow communicating with their author, or the figures in a painting addressing the artist who painted them. The first challenge in considering such communication is conceptualizing the nature of the simulators themselves. They might be beings somewhat like us, perhaps post-human descendants who created motivations and cognitive structures utterly unlike our own. They might even be entities from a reality so different from ours that we lack the conceptual framework to comprehend their nature at all. This uncertainty makes it difficult to determine what forms of communication might be possible or how they might be interpreted. Nevertheless, we can consider theoretical approaches to simulator communication based on the nature of simulated realities. One possibility would be to create distinctive patterns that would be recognizable as artificial and intentional from the perspective of those observing the simulation. This might involve large-scale physical arrangements, systematic manipulation of quantum phenomena, or coordinated global activities that would stand out against the background of typical simulation behavior. Consider, for instance, the construction of massive geometric structures visible from space, arranged in patterns that encode mathematical principles or universal constants, such intentional from the perspective of those observing the simulation. This might involve large-scale physical arrangements, systematic manipulation of quantum phenomena, or coordinated global activities that would stand out against the background of typical simulation behavior. Consider, for instance, our activities at a global scale and would recognize such patterns as attempts at communication. Another approach might involve exploiting potential computational aspects of our reality. If our universe is simulated, certain types of calculations or physical processes might place particularly high demands on the computational resources of the system running the simulation. Coordinated large-scale implementation of such resource-intensive processes might function as a signal to the simulators by noticeably affecting the performance of the computer simulation itself. This strategy has a concerning parallel in certain types of cyber attack in our own computing systems, where denial of service attacks overwhelm systems with excessive processing demands. Applied to simulation theory, this raises the troubling possibility that attempting to communicate through computational stress might be perceived as hostile or threatening by the simulators, potentially triggering defensive responses, including simulation might draw their attention. This could take the form of scientific research, specifically directed at testing the simulation hypothesis, philosophical works exploring its implications, or cultural products like art, literature, or film that engage with the concept of simulated reality. Indeed, our current growing interest in simulation theory might itself constitute a form of implicit communication with potential simulators. The fact that you are listening to this exploration of simulation implications right now might be registered by the simulators as an interesting development within their program, conscious entities beginning to recognize the constructed nature of their reality. Some simulation theorists have proposed more esoteric methods of communication based on consciousness itself. If consciousness in our reality is a simulated process connected to or monitored by the simulators, perhaps certain states of consciousness might facilitate direct communication. Throughout history, mystics, shamans, could potentially represent forms of trans-simulation communication. The ethical implications of attempting simulator communication are complex and troubling. If we successfully drew the attention of the simulators, we cannot predict how they might respond. They might be benevolent, curious, or even delighted by contact from their simulated creations. They might be indifferent, simply observing our attempts without response. Or they might react negatively, seeing communication attempts as a problem to be corrected through simulation modification, or as justification for terminating a simulation that no longer serves its intended purpose. This uncertainty meaningfully communicate with entities that control the very fabric of your reality. What could we offer or request from beings with the power to modify our physics, our history, or our consciousness itself? The power differential would be so extreme that concepts like negotiation, exchange, or mutual benefit might be meaningless. This asymmetry bears resemblance to certain religious conceptions of human-divine relationships, where limited beings attempt to communicate with omnipotent creators. Indeed, some simulation theorists have noted the truth about the deep space between us, parallel between the simulation hypothesis and theological frameworks, suggesting that traditional religious practices might be interpreted as attempts to communicate with simulators misunderstood through pre-technological conceptual frameworks. If this parallel holds, the diversity of religious traditions throughout human history might represent different approaches to simulator communication, each developed within specific cultural and historical contexts. Age-old questions about divine communication. Why do the God simulators not respond more clearly? How can limited beings know what forms of communication would be recognized or valued by transcendent entities? What is the appropriate relationship between created and creator when the creator has absolute power over the created? Yet there's an important distinction between religious conceptions of divine human communication and potential simulator-simulated communication. Traditional theology typically assumes divine benevolence and purpose in creation, while simulation theory makes no such assumption. The simulators might have created our reality for purposes entirely indifferent to the well-being or development of the conscious entities within it. They might value us as experimental subjects, entertainment, or computational resources, but not necessarily as beings with inherent worth or moral standing. This possibility creates a troubling ethical landscape for potential communication attempts. If more data about their simulation or alert them to aspects of their program that they might wish to modify or correct. Despite these concerns, the possibility of communication with the architects of our reality remains one of the most tantalizing aspects of the simulation's hypothesis. It represents a potential transcendence of the boundaries of our existence, a way of reaching beyond the parameters of our reality to touch whatever lies beyond it. Whether such communication is possible, desirable, or wise remains an open question, but one that challenges us to consider our place in reality in profound new ways. Simulation escape theories. While contemplating communication with our potential creators, we must consider an even more profound possibility. What if we could escape the boundaries of our simulated existence? The concept of breaking out of our simulation into a higher level of reality represents perhaps the most radical implication of the simulation hypothesis. It suggests not merely recognizing from one level of existence to another in a kind of ontological ascension. This notion of simulation escape might initially seem absurd, like characters in a novel, somehow stepping off the page into the author's world. Yet as we develop more sophisticated understandings of consciousness, information theory, and the potential structure of reality, certain theoretical pathways for simulation escape begin to emerge. Each speculative and philosophically complex, but not entirely inconceivable, within the framework of simulation theory. To explore these possibilities, we must first consider what escape might actually mean in this context. In the most literal interpretation, escape would involve the transfer of consciousness from the simulated reality to the level above it, from our universe to the reality of the simulators. This would require consciousness to be information that could be extracted from one computational framework and instantiated in another, maintaining continuity of identity across this P. Our reality can sometimes find ways to break out of sandboxed environments in computer systems, accessing higher privilege levels than intended. Perhaps certain manipulations of our reality's parameters could create pathways to the level above. This would require identifying aspects of our physics that represent boundaries or interfaces of the simulation, then finding ways to manipulate these boundaries to allow information transfer across them. Some speculative theories focus on the role of black holes or other extreme physical phenomena as potential simulation boundaries. The physicist James Gates has noted that certain equations in string theory contain error-correcting codes remarkably similar to those used in computer programming, suggesting our physical laws might contain embedded computational structures. If such structures could be identified and manipulated, they might reveal interfaces between our simulation and whatever system runs it. Another approach focuses on technological advance. Simulated beings developed sufficient computational power and understanding. They might create technologies that could interact with or affect the higher reality. At its most extreme, this could involve creating a technology within the simulation that could somehow transfer consciousness out of it. Consider the implications if we developed artificial intelligence sophisticated enough to understand the computational structure of our reality itself. Such an AI might identify patterns or vulnerabilities invisible to human perception, potentially finding pathways for information transfer between reality levels that we cannot currently conceive. This creates the intriguing possibility that our development of advanced AI might itself be a step toward potential simulation escape. Some simulation escape theories focus on consciousness itself as the escape mechanism. If consciousness is fundamentally informational rather than physical, and if it has properties that transcend the specific substrate in which to perceive realities beyond ordinary experience. Throughout human history, mystical and spiritual practices have claimed to achieve states of consciousness that transcend ordinary reality experiences, variously described as enlightenment, cosmic consciousness, or union with the divine. While traditionally interpreted through religious frameworks, these experiences share certain common features that align intriguingly with what we might expect from consciousness, partially perceiving the level above our simulation, the sense of transcending time and space, perceiving reality as constructed or illusory, experiencing unity with something greater than individual existence. Could such experiences represent consciousness temporarily glitching out of its simulated constraints, briefly perceiving aspects of the reality beyond our own? This interpretation would reframe ancient mystical traditions as proto-technological approaches to simulation interface developed through experimentation with human consciousness. Both explore the possibility that our perceived reality is not fundamental but constructed, can both seek ways to perceive or access what lies beyond it. The language and conceptual frameworks differ dramatically, but the underlying project shows remarkable similarities across these seemingly disparate domains. Yet simulation escape, if possible at all, would likely involve profound risks and uncertainties. If consciousness could somehow be transferred to the level above our simulation, what would it experience there? Would it be compatible with whatever substrate or environment exists in that reality? Would it maintain coherence and continuity, or would the transition fundamentally alter or fragment identity? These questions highlight the existential vertigo of contemplating existence across radically different reality contexts. Moreover, successful escape by some entities might have implications for those remaining within the simulation. If the simulators became aware that their simulated beings creates a troubling ethical dimension to escape attempts, where the actions of some might potentially endanger the continued existence of all. There's also the possibility that what appears to be escape might actually be containment within a deeper level of simulation. The simulators, noticing entities approaching escape capability, might transfer those entities to a different simulation designed to create the illusion of escape while actually maintaining control. This simulation within the simulation would be designed to satisfy the escapees' expectations of a higher reality while keeping them safely contained within the overall system. This possibility creates a kind of ontological paranoia, where any apparent transcendence of reality might actually be a more sophisticated level of illusion. How would escaped consciousness know it had reached base reality rather than simply another level of simulation? This question echoes the infinite regress problem in simulation theory generally, the difficult, profound extension of humanity's age-old quest to transcend its limitations. Throughout history, we have sought to overcome boundaries of all kinds: geographical, intellectual, technological, biological. Simulation escape would represent the ultimate boundary crossing, transcending the very framework of reality itself to access whatever lies beyond it. This possibility transforms our understanding of technological development and consciousness exploration. Our advancing technologies might be more than tools for improving life within our reality. They might be potential pathways to transcending it entirely. Similarly, consciousness exploration through meditation, psychedelics, or other means might be more than subjective psychological experiences. They might be early experiments in perception across reality boundaries. As you drift closer to sleep, consider that your consciousness, currently processing these words, might contain within it latent capabilities for perception or existence beyond the parameter fluidity across different states of being, infinite regression. As we contemplate breaking the boundaries of our simulated prison, we must consider an even more unsettling possibility: that our simulators themselves might be simulated beings in a higher-order reality. This concept of infinite regression in simulation layers creates perhaps the most vertigo-inducing aspect of the entire simulation hypothesis. The possibility that reality consists of simulations all the way up and down, with no discernible bottom or top to the stack. Imagine, if you will, an infinite hall of mirrors, each reflection containing another reflection extending endlessly in both directions. Or picture the paradoxical image of a painter painting himself, painting himself, painting himself, receding infinitely into the canvas. These visual metaphors capture something of the conceptual vertigo that infinite simulation regression creates: a cascade of realities, each contained within another, with no fundamental level that grounds T. Have emerged through some developmental process. The beings or systems that created our simulation must themselves have originated somewhere within some reality, with its own physics and history. But what if that reality is also simulated? And what if the reality above that one is simulated as well? Once we accept the possibility of one level of simulation, it becomes difficult to rule out multiple levels extending indefinitely. The philosopher Nick Bostrom, in developing his simulation argument, acknowledged this possibility of nested simulations, but focused primarily on the relationship between base reality, the uppermost non-simulated level, and simulations directly created within it. Yet, the logical extension of his argument suggests that if simulation is possible at all, multiple layers of it become probable. If any technologically advanced civilization is likely to create numerous reality simulations, then this pattern would likely repeat at each level where sufficient technological advancement rounds the entire hierarchy. Or could reality consist of simulations all the way up in an infinite regress with no bottom or top? This question challenges our intuitive understanding of causation and creation, which typically assumes some fundamental starting point or foundation. Some philosophers have argued that an infinite regression of simulations is logically incoherent, that there must be some base reality that isn't itself simulated, some unmoved mover that initiates the entire causal chain. This argument parallels traditional cosmological arguments for the existence of God, which claim that infinite causal regression is impossible, and therefore some first cause must exist. Applied to simulation theory, this would suggest some uppermost reality that is fundamental rather than simulated. Others contend that infinite regression, while conceptually challenging, isn't logically impossible. Mathematics deals comfortably with infinite series and recursion. Some cosmological models propose infinite within the context of another. This possibility creates profound challenges for our understanding of concepts like creation, causation, and ontological status. If there is no base reality, what grounds existence itself? If every level is simulated within another level, where does the buck ultimately stop? These questions push against the limits of human comprehension, challenging our deeply ingrained intuition that explanatory chains must have starting points. The infinite regression hypothesis also transforms our understanding of the relationship between creator and created. In traditional theological frameworks, God or gods stand outside creation as absolute originators. In the simulation hypothesis, with base reality, the uppermost level maintains a similar position of absolute ontological priority. But in an infinite regression model, every creator is also a creation. Every simulator is also simulated. This creates a strange democratization of ontological status where no level has absolute priority. from our perspective, is ultimately contingent rather than absolute. They would stand in the same relationship to the level above them as we do to them, powerful within their context, but ultimately created and potentially controlled by higher levels. This creates a strange relativization of creator status, where absolute authority never firmly rests anywhere in the infinite chain. This infinite regression also raises questions about the flow of information and influence between levels. Could effects propagate not just one level up or down, but across multiple levels of the simulation hierarchy? Might actions in our reality somehow influence or be influenced by realities many levels removed from our own, through chains of causal connection passing through the intervening levels? This would create a vast, infinitely complex web of inter-reality causation, where events at any level might have ripple effects throughout the entire simulation stack. The computational implications of infinite regression are, at each stage, due to the overhead of simulation itself. This would create a hierarchy of diminishing computational capacity as we move down the simulation stack. Our reality, if many levels deep in such a hierarchy, would have access to only a tiny fraction of the computational resources available at higher levels. This computational constraint might manifest as fundamental limits in our physics, boundaries to how much complexity, precision, or detail can exist in our universe. The Planck length, Planck time, speed of light, and other physical constants might represent computational limitations imposed by our position in a simulation hierarchy, rather than fundamental properties of reality itself. If so, these constants might differ at different levels of the simulation stack, with higher levels potentially having physics with different or fewer limitations. The infinite regression hypothesis also transforms our understanding of consciousness and its relationship to reality. If consciousness can be simulated, would create a strange democratization of consciousness, where no level has exclusive claim to real consciousness. All levels would contain experience that is authentic from within its own context. This perspective challenges the intuitive dualism that often emerges when first considering simulation theory, the tendency to view base reality as real and simulations as somehow less real or artificial. In an infinite regression model, this distinction collapses. Every level is simultaneously real from within and simulated from above. Reality becomes relative to perspective rather than an absolute property. Some philosophers have suggested that this infinite regression might actually loop back on itself, creating a circular rather than linear structure. Perhaps the lowest level of simulation somehow creates the highest level, forming a closed loop with no beginning or end. This would resemble certain cyclical cosmological models, or the concept of the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail. An ancient or summit reality would be self-supporting, a closed causal loop with no external ground or absolute starting point. While conceptually challenging, this model aligns with certain interpretations of general relativity, where spacetime curves back on itself, and with some interpretations of quantum mechanics, where observation creates the reality that makes observation possible. The infinite regression hypothesis also has implications for simulation escape theories. If there is no base reality, what would escape actually mean? Perhaps rather than absolute escape from simulation altogether, the best we could hope for would be movement up one level in the simulation hierarchy, trading our current simulated reality for the one directly above it, which would itself be simulated from yet another level. This creates a strange relativity to transcendence, where ascension is always possible, but absolute escape never is. As you continue to drift toward sleep, Allow yourself to float with this concept of potency. Firm ground to reality mirrors, in some ways, the experience of falling asleep itself, where the solid world of wakefulness gives way to the fluid, unbounded realm of dreams. Perhaps this daily transition offers a minor analog of the greater transitions between reality levels, a reminder that consciousness can move between different orders of experience while maintaining its essential nature. The infinite regression hypothesis ultimately leads us to a profound humility about our place in the cosmos. If reality consists of layer upon layer of simulation, with no absolute foundation, then every perspective is simultaneously central from within its own context and peripheral from a broader view. No level can claim absolute ontological priority. No vantage point can capture the totality of the infinite structure. We exist within our level, authentic and real from our perspective, while potentially being part of a vastly larger structure beyond our comprehension. This humility echoes certain mystical Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao, suggests that fundamental reality transcends our conceptual frameworks. The Jewish mystical tradition speaks of Ein Sof, the infinite divine beyond human comprehension. The Buddhist concept of sunyata, emptiness, points to the lack of inherent existence in all phenomena. These traditions, emerging long before simulation theory, nonetheless grappled with similar implications about the potential groundlessness of reality as we perceive it. Perhaps, then, the infinite regression hypothesis represents a technological reformulation of ancient mystical insights, the recognition that reality might be more complex, more recursive, and less firmly grounded than our everyday perception suggests. The vertigo it induces might be not a bug, but a feature, a necessary disorientation that comes from glimpsing the true complexity of existence beyond our limited perceptual frameworks. Consciousness as computation. While grappling with the dizzying concept of infinite simulation, question, what if consciousness, that most intimate and seemingly ineffable aspect of our existence, is fundamentally computational in nature? What if our subjective experience of being aware, of having thoughts and feelings, of experiencing sensations and emotions, is ultimately reducible to information processing occurring in a computational substrate? This perspective represents a radical departure from many traditional understandings of consciousness. Throughout much of human history, consciousness has been conceptualized as something mysterious and potentially non-physical, a soul, spirit, or mind somehow separate from the material world. Even as science has increasingly linked mental phenomena to brain activity, many maintain that subjective experience possesses an irreducible quality that cannot be fully explained in physical or computational terms. Philosophers refer to this as the hard problem of consciousness, the difficulty of explaining how physical processes, no matter how complex, could give a process running within the computational framework of the simulation. This would mean that conscious experience can indeed emerge from purely informational processes, as evidenced by the fact that we experience consciousness despite potentially being nothing more than complex algorithms running in someone else's computer. To grasp the implications of this, consider the analogy of weather simulation. When meteorologists model a hurricane in a computer simulation, the simulation calculates air pressure, temperature gradients, moisture content, and countless other variables. The simulated hurricane exists as pure information patterns of data being processed according to mathematical rules. It never gets anything wet. No physical wind ever blows. Yet, it can accurately represent all the essential properties and behaviors of an actual hurricane. Consciousness as computation suggests that our subjective experience might have a similar relationship to whatever computational substrate runs our simulation. Why? To explain them. Just as the simulated hurricane captures the essential dynamics of a physical hurricane without actually being a physical weather event, simulated consciousness might capture the essential qualities of awareness without requiring anything beyond information processing. This perspective aligns with certain contemporary theories in philosophy of mind, particularly functionalism and computational theories of consciousness. These approaches suggest that what matters for consciousness is not the physical substrate in which it occurs, but the functional relationships and information processing patterns that constitute it. Under this view, consciousness could theoretically be realized in any substrate capable of implementing the right kind of computational architecture, whether organic brains, silicon computers, or the unknown computational medium that might run our simulation. The implications of this view are profound and unsettling. If consciousness is fundamentally computational, then would be no less real for occurring in a simulation from the inside. Simulated joy or simulated suffering would be experienced identically to their non-simulated counterparts. This realization challenges our intuitive dualism about simulation, the tendency to think of simulated phenomena as somehow less real or authentic than their non-simulated counterparts. If consciousness itself can be perfectly simulated, then the most intimate and seemingly irreducible aspect of our existence can exist as pure information. This suggests that perhaps everything else we consider real might be equally reducible to information processing, that the distinction between simulation and reality might ultimately collapse altogether. Consider how this transforms our understanding of personal identity and continuity of consciousness. If your mind is fundamentally a pattern of information rather than a specific physical object, then that pattern could potentially be copied, transferred, or instantiated in multiple locations. This computational view of consciousness also raises profound questions about artificial intelligence. If consciousness is fundamentally computational, then sufficiently advanced AI systems might eventually become conscious in exactly the same sense that humans are conscious. The distinction between artificial and natural intelligence would blur, as both would represent patterns of information processing that give rise to subjective experience. Our simulated minds and simulated AI minds would both be algorithms running within the larger simulation. Yet this perspective also creates troubling questions about the nature and value of conscious experience. If consciousness is just computation, does this somehow devalue or diminish it? Does reducing the richness of human experience to information processing make it less meaningful or significant? Many find this implication disturbing, a sense that explaining consciousness in computational terms somehow explains it away or strips it of its profound sig. Information processes feel like something from the inside. Why does the computation that constitutes pain feel painful? Why does the computation that constitutes seeing the color red look like that particular subjective experience? These questions seem to persist even if we accept that consciousness is fundamentally computational in nature. Some philosophers and scientists suggest that this explanatory gap might be illusory, that it results from our limited perspective as conscious entities trying to understand consciousness itself. Perhaps from a more comprehensive viewpoint, the emergence of subjective experience from computation would seem natural and inevitable rather than mysterious. Our difficulty in bridging the explanatory gap might reflect limitations in our conceptual frameworks, rather than any fundamental mystery in the relationship between computation and consciousness. Others suggest that consciousness might involve properties or principles that go beyond computation as we currently know, while enriching it to account for the seemingly non-computational aspects of conscious experience. The simulation hypothesis adds another layer to this already complex discussion. If our consciousness exists within a simulation, then whatever explains consciousness must be explicable within the computational framework of that simulation. Our consciousness would be a simulation of consciousness running within the larger reality simulation. This creates a strange recursion. Simulated minds contemplating the computational nature of their own simulated consciousness. This recursive quality points to one of the most profound implications of consciousness as computation: the possibility that consciousness itself might be a kind of simulation. Perhaps what we experience as awareness is itself a model or representation created by our cognitive systems, a simulation of a unified self experiencing a coherent world constructed from the disparate and fragmented processes occurring in our cognitive architect. Aligns with certain contemporary neuroscientific theories that characterize consciousness as a kind of controlled hallucination or predictive model generated by the brain to help navigate reality. Under these theories, what we experience as consciousness is itself a kind of virtual reality, a simplified, useful model of immensely complex underlying processes. If these theories are correct, then our consciousness would be a simulation within a simulation, a virtual reality generated by our simulated brains within the larger virtual reality of the simulation itself. As you lie there drifting closer to sleep, consider that your current experience of listening to these words, of feeling your body on the bed, of having thoughts and feelings about these ideas, all of this might be a computational process running in a simulated brain, which itself runs within a larger reality simulation. Your consciousness might be computation all the way down, patterns of information processing that somehow mysteriously, whether implemented in organic neurons, silicon processors, or the unknown computational substrate of our potential simulation. Your joy, suffering, love, and wonder remain exactly as you experience them. The computational nature of consciousness, if true, would not make your life any less meaningful or your experiences any less authentic. It would simply reveal something profound about the relationship between information, computation, and the subjective experience of being, living in a simulated universe. As we contemplate the possibly illusory nature of our own consciousness, we arrive at perhaps the most profound question of all. What does the simulation hypothesis mean for concepts of meaning, purpose, and ethics in our lives? If we accept the possibility that our reality is simulated, how should this transform our understanding of how to live, what to value, and how to relate to our existence? This question brings us full circle in our exploration, returning from abstract theoretical considerations to an elaborate simulation. We still wake each morning to our lives, make choices, form relationships, experience joy and suffering, and seek meaning in our existence. How might the simulation hypothesis inform this lived experience? Let's begin with the question of meaning and purpose. Traditional sources of meaning often involve concepts like cosmic significance, divine intention, or natural teleology, the sense that the universe itself contains inherent purpose that our lives can align with or fulfill. The simulation hypothesis transforms these concepts without necessarily eliminating them. If our reality is simulated, it was created not by traditional deities, but by advanced beings or systems with particular purposes or intentions. This creates a curious parallel to religious conceptions of divine creation and purpose. The simulators, like gods in religious frameworks, would have created our reality for reasons of their own. Our lives might serve purposes within their grand design that we cannot fully see. Well-being. They might have created our reality for scientific research, entertainment, or purposes entirely alien to our understanding. This possibility creates both opportunity and challenge for meaning-seeking. On one hand, the simulation hypothesis offers a kind of cosmic significance. Our reality matters enough to someone to dedicate vast computational resources to creating and maintaining it. On the other hand, it raises the unsettling possibility that the purpose our lives serve might be indifferent or even contrary to what we would consider meaningful or valuable. Yet perhaps the most liberating implication of the simulation hypothesis is that it ultimately returns us to the existentialist insight that meaning is something we create rather than discover. Whether in base reality or simulation, the significance of our experiences, relationships, and projects ultimately derives from our own valuing of them. The fact that we might exist in a simulation created for purposes beyond our understanding. Perspective might transform our approach to ethics and morality. Some might initially worry that the simulation hypothesis undermines moral responsibility. If nothing is real, why does it matter how we treat others or what choices we make? But this concern rests on a misunderstanding of what the simulation hypothesis actually implies. If our reality is simulated, the conscious experiences within it, including the suffering or flourishing of other beings, remain absolutely real from the perspective of those experiencing them. Simulated pain hurts just as much as real pain. Simulated joy feels just as wonderful as real joy. The computational nature of these experiences doesn't make them any less authentic or significant to those undergoing them. This means that ethical considerations remain just as pressing in a simulated reality as they would in base reality. How we treat other conscious beings still matters profoundly, regardless of the underlying nature of the reality we share. The simulation hypothesis. Experience. If all consciousness is ultimately computational in nature, then the suffering of any conscious entity, human, animal, or even artificial, deserves moral consideration. The boundary between natural and artificial consciousness becomes meaningless if all consciousness is essentially information processing that feels like something from the inside. This perspective aligns with certain philosophical traditions that emphasize compassion based on the recognition of shared consciousness. Buddhist ethics, for instance, centers on alleviating suffering regardless of the type of being experiencing it. The simulation hypothesis offers a technological framework for understanding this fundamental unity of conscious experience across different types of entities. The simulation hypothesis also transforms our relationship to death and finitude. In traditional understandings, death represents the permanent end of individual consciousness, but in a simulated reality, death might function differently. Perhaps death is simply a transition to another level or mode of the simulation. These possibilities don't eliminate the significance of death in our experienced reality. The loss and separation it creates remain real and profound, but they suggest that death might not be the absolute end it appears to be from within our limited perspective. This creates a curious parallel to religious conceptions of afterlife, but grounded in technological possibility rather than supernatural belief. The simulation hypothesis also offers new perspectives on age-old ideas. Philosophical problems like free will and determinism. If our reality is a computer program, are our choices determined by its algorithms? Do we have genuine agency, or are we simply playing out predetermined patterns? These questions mirror traditional philosophical debates about free will in a deterministic universe, but with a technological, rather than physical or theological framing. The answer might depend on the nature of the simulation itself. Perhaps our incorporates genuine randomness or complexity that allows for emergence of patterns not predetermined by the simulators. Most intriguingly, perhaps, consciousness itself, even within a simulated framework, possesses a kind of autonomy or self-determination that transcends simple algorithmic determination. This last possibility suggests that even in a programmed reality, the emergence of conscious systems might create a form of genuine agency, not absolute or unconstrained, but authentic within its context. Our choices would be influenced and limited by the parameters of the simulation, just as in conventional understanding, they are influenced and limited by physics, biology, and psychology, but might nonetheless represent genuine exercises of will within those constraints. As we consider how to live in light of the simulation hypothesis, we might find wisdom in philosophical traditions that have long grappled with the potentially constructed or illusory nature of reality. Buddhist perspectives on Maya, Taoist concepts of wu-wei, non-forcing action, suggest that aligning with the fundamental nature of reality, whatever it may be, creates harmony and flow in life. These traditions remind us that the simulation hypothesis, far from undermining meaning or purpose, might actually enhance our capacity for wonder, presence, and appreciation. Recognizing that reality might be constructed doesn't make it any less marvelous. Indeed, it might make it more so. The intricate complexity, the mathematical elegance, the emergent beauty of our world becomes even more astonishing if we consider it might be the product of designed computation rather than random chance. This perspective invites a kind of double consciousness in our relationship to reality, simultaneously engaging fully with our experienced world while maintaining awareness of its potentially constructed nature. We need not choose between immersion and perspective. We can live with both, allowing each to enrich the other. We can love, create, explore, and connect. Much larger structure of existence. As you drift towards sleep, carrying these ideas into the boundary space between conscious and unconscious thought, consider that whether our reality is base or simulated, your experiences, connections, and consciousness remain meaningful within the context of your existence. The beauty you've perceived, the love you've felt, the understanding you've achieved, all these retain their significance, regardless of the underlying nature of the reality in which they've occurred. Perhaps the most profound implication of the simulation hypothesis is not that our reality might be artificial, but that even an artificial reality can contain authentic beauty, love, and wonder. The distinction between real and simulated begins to dissolve when we recognize that conscious experience, wherever and however it occurs, creates its own authenticity through the very act of experiencing. Your life, simulated or not, is exactly as real as it feels to you, living it. And so as you continue your J, offers not a diminishment of reality, but an expansion of possibility, an invitation to consider that existence might be vaster, stranger, and more wondrous than our conventional understanding suggests. Whether as base reality or exquisite simulation, the universe remains a miracle of complexity and consciousness, worthy of our attention, appreciation, and care. Sleep well and perhaps dream of realities beyond our own knowing, that even in dreams, something authentic is experienced, something real is happening in the cosmos as consciousness explores its own nature through endless permutations of being and becoming.